Hello and welcome. I'm Beau Simmons, editor of the Stillwater News Press, and I'm joined by Studio Stillwater's Chris Peters.
Howdy.
City editor Michelle Charles.
Hello.
And news editor Tanner Holubar.
Hey, how's it going?
And we are in the newsroom. We're just going to do a little recap of the previous week, and then we'll talk a little bit about the things we have coming up. I think probably one of our top stories is the return to classroom. I don't know if it's a continuing saga, Michelle. I don't know if we call it that, but we did get a little teacher perspective on how things are going. So you talked to the local union rep and some other folks. And yeah, why don't you just bring us up to speed?
Okay. Yeah, I would call it a saga. It feels like a saga at this point. And you have, you have people on both sides who have felt very passionately about it. We've had a lawsuit filed. So, there's been a lot going on around this. Ultimately, it was a matter of, getting the kids back to school, which everyone did want to do. But people had different ideas about how to do that safely, when you could do that safely, was really what it boiled down to. The district is finally ready to pull the trigger, as it were, and bring the kids back 5 days a week at the end of spring break, starting on March 22nd. There's been a lot of discord and just sort of maybe lack of communication, or people kind of making assumptions about what other people are thinking, is how it seems to me as I look at it. But basically, there are some parents who I believe have been pretty vocal about feeling like teachers just didn't want to go back to the classroom, that they were too fearful, that they should just hang it up if they just couldn't handle it. And you have teachers who feel like they're really looking out not just for themselves, but for the children as well. They want to be sure that everybody's going to be safe. And then you've probably got people all across the spectrum in between, right? Mm-hmm. Anyway, the school board was going to have a final review this week of the safety plan that is designed to get kids back into the classroom again after spring break ends. And ahead of that, there was a community member. She's a researcher who has been, very concerned about whether the data that's been coming out has been consistent and has been accurate. So she and a small group of other people have set up a Facebook group where they're putting out their own data, their own charts, and they're keeping track of this stuff. She decided that there really hadn't been enough discussion about whether the 4 factors that are really within the school's control in terms of keeping people safe. Because, the CDC put out guidance that suggested that, kids should get back to school, that should be the priority in your community. And they laid out 11 different things that need to happen that need to be in place in order for that to happen. And a lot of it's community stuff that the school doesn't really have control over. But the things that the school does have control over are masking, hand washing, sanitation, and physical distance. The problem is that you've got the teachers who are basically tasked with enforcing that, making sure that's in place. And she wanted to have a discussion about whether the teachers felt prepared to adequately do that with their full class in there. Because up till now, we've been on an A-B schedule where you basically only had half your students at a time. So it was a little easier, right?
A little bit easier to control, yeah, probably with, I'm guessing, a dozen to 15 or so or less students. And I'm sure that was also a little bit of a glimpse of what a smaller classroom size would look like in normal times for them. I'm sure that was quite pleasant.
Oh, I'm sure it was. And, a lot of them, in the survey that she did, what really came out was that they weren't so worried about masking, because a lot of them said that's basic classroom management. You can do that if you just have control of the kids in your class and you're staying on top of things. Hand washing, as they got older, got a little bit tougher because you can't follow a middle schooler into the bathroom and make sure they're washing their hands. You just have to have hand sanitizer everywhere, right? And just ensure everyone's constantly kind of bathing in Purell, as it were. And, the distancing was really where they felt uncomfortable. And the school board itself has had discussions where they've said, once we get all the kids back, we can't do 6 feet. We know we can't do 6 feet. In some situations, we're lucky to do 2 or 3 feet. And, they've been kind of banking, at least with the littles, the younger kids. If the masking is inconsistent, if there's not as much distance, that they don't tend to get as sick. And that there's some research anyway that seems to show that they're less likely to spread it. Anyway, all of that went through the school board, frankly, because we did a story about it, was kind of forced to deal with the survey because I don't know if it would have been discussed otherwise. At least the author of the survey was under the impression that it might not have been. So that was part of the issue. But anyway, they talked about it and determined that they are going to proceed and they are going to go back to school 5 days a week, all the kids through high school. Originally, they were just going to do the younger kids and then keep the older kids out a little bit longer. They're going back with everybody 5 days a week through seniors in high school, and they're going to monitor it very closely for the first couple of weeks and see if there are any problems.
And a few things working in their favor is community spread is fewer than probably 10 people eat every day, and as a case-by-case basis, there are probably fewer than 10 cases now every day, and almost every teacher who wanted to is able to be vaccinated, right? I mean, just about.
Right. One of the hang-ups with a few of the teachers was just that, the kids, of course, kids younger than 16 can't get vaccinated. But anyone, 16 or over is eligible now. But not everyone is going to have had time to have gotten their second dose. Even the teachers who were vaccinated at the clinic sponsored by the school district will not all have had their second dose yet when everybody goes back to school. But, with everyone 16 and above, eligible for the Pfizer vaccine, that picks up, pretty much the whole high school, which is the group that they've been the most concerned about in terms of being independently mobile, very social, and old enough that they are apparently a little bit more likely to get a little bit sicker or be able to spread it more. So, there are some really hopeful signs. And as you said, the community spread's down, hospitalizations are down, things are trending in the right way, and they're counting on it continuing.
Crossing fingers.
Right. Definitely.
Full disclosure, just about all of us in here have had at least a first dose, right? Are we?
Yes.
Yeah. How about that?
Double dosed.
Yeah. Next Friday, I'm eligible for my second dose. I got the Pfizer vaccine.
Nice.
Right. Okay. We talked a little last week about the change in events, the things we lost, the things we're getting back. And Tanner talked to is it the creator or is it just the person now running the Red Dirt Film Festival?
It's Damon Blaylock. He's the director.
Okay.
It's been a few different people here and there. Damon was over in Europe for a little while, but he's been the kind of the head honcho over there as far as planning and everything for the last few years. But yeah, no, he was still pretty adamant on trying to have a lot of the same things that, even though this festival will be virtual, he was still pretty adamant that there's a lot of these things that, it's kind of what a film festival is you have time where there's panels where you can hear from the directors, you can hear from actors, you can hear from people who worked on set, who did makeup, all kinds of these different things that maybe you don't get the same perspective as if you just go into the movies or something, So he still wanted to have an aspect of that this year for this festival. So there will still be some Zoom type of things that will take place, some panels and things, but there will still be some people here in town. So I think that's kind of a cool thing that they were still just wanting to have, as much of that film festival aspect of it as they could. And, I think it still sounds like they still have, they've got films from local high school kids. They've got films from, universities. So there's a lot of, there are international films at times from places like Finland or Japan, but I think the real cool thing about this festival is it really does put an aspect on Oklahoma filmmakers, all the people who really, put the time in to make these films and, that's kind of the fun thing to talk with some of these directors is you really hear it is, it's a broad production, even for a zombie film, there's probably 50 to 100 people who were extras who all played zombies, they're all in the cast list and everything. So it's just, and you hear these kind of, oh, we filmed this over 2 weeks, I wasn't eating, I wasn't sleeping, it's just a blur. And it's just kind of, it's cool to hear so much that goes into what, it's still a pretty big production, even though it might be smaller scale. There's still just a lot of people doing that. So I think it's still a cool thing that they're still going to have this year's festival, even though it's a little different than maybe years past.
But it's a good time for them because it's also a good time for the Oklahoma film industry. A lot of people are taking advantage of these incentives, tax credits, different things that they do for Oklahoma films. Right now they're shooting Killers of the Flower Moon, right?
Right.
Yeah.
They're calling it Gray Horse. That's the shooting name for it right now. But up in the Bartlesville, Pawhuska area, they're looking for extras. And I saw the other day they're looking for Native American people who are good drivers who can learn how to drive complicated 1920s vehicles. Like where you have to shift on the column and you have to do all kinds of things that we don't do anymore.
Yeah, and before long, and we of course had the Matt Damon vehicle, Stillwater,
which we have not seen
movie,
yet.
which I don't think they've announced a release date for that, but we know that was shot here and around here. So,
Tanner, didn't you? I mean, you wrote a story about the zombie movie that's going to be part of the festival, right?
Right, and that was kind of what was, that guy. He told me that there was a 2-week shoot, but and he wasn't eating well, sleeping well. He said he has to remember through other people's memories of it, but it was really cool talking to him. His name's Patrick Sean Bingham. And, he had written this screenplay back in 2003, and then so that kind of shows the process of, the first things. And he really made a lot of characters, kind of aspects of parts of his personality, parts of his experiences, so, but they filmed at a lot of locations in Oklahoma City. They filmed at several buildings on the campus of Langston University, Guthrie Haunts, some places in downtown Guthrie, so there's a lot of local places that, it was kind of just cool to hear that they were, filming something, pretty much at night, when the students were off campus, things like that, so, but it was just kind of cool that, and then, to hear local filmmakers using Oklahoma talent, Oklahoma production talent, that things like that. So it's truly a, an Oklahoma production, the film called Zombactor, Center City Contagion. So
and this is one of their feature-length films.
Right. I think it's about a little over an hour, but I guess it's on Amazon Prime now. And
oh man,
so
I'll have to check it out.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of another cool thing is about this festival is, I mean, there was I think one screenplay written by Shia LaBeouf that a few years ago was in the Red Dirt Film Festival. And
Honey Boy.
Right,
yeah.
and then that was in, I think, Sundance, I believe. It was in another, one of the more famous film festivals, but it was in the one in Stillwater first, so that's kind of one of those cool things that, there's almost maybe a progression of certain films that, make their way through this film festival and end up being, something that maybe a big company buys or something one day, so that's just kind of the cool aspect of having a local film festival that, really does have a lot of high-end production, a lot of high-end people coming in, so it's pretty exciting.
That is cool. And, and you were talking about the Oklahoma film industry, and haven't they turned the Cox Convention Center into a soundstage now? I actually saw something about that. I believe there's a soundstage facility going in Oklahoma City.
Yeah, it's great. It'd be a great time to get on on that any way you can. I don't if you knew a way to produce film or host things or create a studio of any
Be
kind.
Be a key grip,
And
whatever that does.
Because a lot of what they do hire local talent, local engineers, all those kind of things. Yeah. Something else we talked about last week was vaccinations, and
yes,
what we wanted to know what kind of success we were having around here. But Michelle she was on a press call with the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and that's one of the great success stories, I think, in our entire country is how well tribes have handled vaccination distribution. What did you learn on your call?
Well, yes, I did learn that the tribes are doing a very good job with it. There was a representative from Indian Health Service who is in charge of the region that covers Navajo land, basically, the Navajo Nation. And I mean, of course, they made the news early on because they were being ravaged by the pandemic. And there were a lot of concerns about that because, on the Navajo reservation, not a lot of infrastructure. People live in very rural areas. You have a lot of elders who live there. And there's been a lot of concern within the Native community about losing our elders simply because, they're the ones who know more of the traditions. They're the ones who have more knowledge of the language. And so every time you lose an elder, you are losing an incredibly valuable cultural resource as well. You're losing a little bit of your culture. And so that's really felt like kind of a cultural crisis as well as a health crisis. But anyway, in the Navajo Nation, they have worked very, very hard to turn it around. And they are to the point where at least 70% of the people on the reserve area have had at least their first shot. And now they're focusing on getting everyone that second shot. And they're doing, a really targeted approach. They've got strike teams that basically go out, and it sounds threatening, but it's not. They're just health strike teams or vaccination strike teams that go out to the really rural areas because there are people, on the Navajo reservation who they live in places that are not easily accessible. The roads are not good. They're in very, very remote areas, and they're hard to reach. You would hope that would lessen their risk a little bit, but it's no guarantee.
Yeah.
But anyway, so these strike teams are going out and they're through their home health program, and they are utilizing the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, which only requires one dose.
How did they get that? Right?
In a very targeted way. Because basically in Indian country, what I heard was that the Johnson & Johnson vaccine is, of course, a new player on the scene. Some people worry that, because its overall efficacy is supposed to be a little bit lower percentage, right? But that factors in a lot of the variants that were already circulating as it was being tested. But it only requires the one dose. So it's being used in jails. It's being used in rehab centers. It's being used in other places where people live in group settings. And it's being used for people who live in very rural areas where it might be hard to reach them to get them the second dose on time. So the Navajo Nation has done very, very well with that. In Oklahoma, IHS has a territory that covers all of Oklahoma, Kansas, and a portion of Texas.
Wow.
A total of 49 tribes. So it's a big area. There are a lot of people to deal with. Each tribal clinic can, if it meets certain standards, can sign up to be a vaccine provider. And in our area, a lot of them are doing that. And one thing that it really stood out for me is how much the tribes serve the general communities that they're around. And we've talked about this before about, economic issues. Tribal governments can be real economic drivers for the areas where they're located. They provide employment for a lot of people who aren't necessarily on the tribal rolls. So, and now they're providing health care. Down in Perkins, the Iowa tribe runs the Perkins Health Clinic. And they are providing vaccinations for everyone, Indian and non-Indian. And the same is true in a lot of places.
Which also speaks to their success, meaning they've had to have hit a great percentage of tribal members to be able to offer that outside of the tribe, I would think.
Well, I think it means you've definitely at least hit your elders, right?
Yeah.
You've at least hit the really high-risk people, and now you're expanding. Because in some of the tribal areas, they've opened it up to anyone of any age who is approved to receive the vaccine. You don't necessarily, so not necessarily those state tiers that they've been following. I was trying to think. There was another point I was going to make about that. Overall in Indian country, the rate of vaccination is around 36 or 38%, though.
Is this nationwide?
If you look at nationwide.
Okay.
If you look at nationwide, and that includes Native Americans, Alaska Natives as well. So there's some really remote areas up in Alaska.
In a large,
exactly,
large area.
But it's very comparable with the rest of the population. So there are certain pockets where they're really, really, really killing it and really hitting it hard. But some of those are areas where they were being decimated, and then overall, at least staying up with maybe a little bit ahead of the rest of the country.
All right. And I think another thing we're going to talk about, for a lot of people, March 11th, this past Thursday, was sort of an anniversary for when everything hit home on the pandemic, because that was when the Thunder game was paused and then canceled, and it started this domino effect in major American sports. And that was, right here playing out in front of all of us. We sort of take a look at this like our anniversary would kind of be the first Payne County case. But before I jump to that, since I got Chris here, who is you've actually ridden in the Mid-South, right? I mean,
multiple times. I helped the last until this year. I was the person up on a tall ladder helping to hang the finish line banners and all that stuff 20 feet up in the air, early in the morning. So I've been really involved.
Which is our huge gravel race and for cyclists. And that was also we're also coming up on that anniversary. They're doing that this year, and it was really our last kind of big community gathering. It happened, I think, just the week before that Thunder game as well, mm-hmm. But they were already sort of trying to do the socially distance thing. They were taking what precautions they could. We didn't know a lot of the science, we didn't mm-hmm. know a lot of those things, but they were still being careful. And this year it's a little bit different, right?
Yeah. So this year they've called it now the incredibly socially distanced Mid-South. And so there's no organized event going on here. There's no big stage with a band. There's not, even though some people are thinking, I guess, Zanotti's new outdoor dining area is a stage. It's not a stage. It's a outdoor patio, effectively. What they did is they partnered with around 10 other bike shops around the country, Texas, California, Arkansas, all over the place. And those bike shops went and created a gravel route. These are all kind of shops also that are kind of within the gravel scene and gravel, areas of the country. So if you are, say you're near Austin, Texas, you can go on, they call it Ride with GPS, but there's an app. So you can go through and you can see all the routes that you can ride in. So if there's one near you, so say you live in Missouri, for example, and there's not one in Missouri, you could, maybe you and a couple friends go down to Arkansas and go ride that route. And then they also, they started with that. And this is really what is interesting about the community that they've built over the years. Because as soon as they announced, hey, here's these routes that these other bike shops are going to be, that they kind of put together, it's fully unsupported. Nobody's out there to pick you up if you break your bike. There's no Jeeps out there playing in the mud to come rescue you. Like, this is all 100% self-supported, which is the actual grassroots nature of these entire gravel events. And so some people were like, well, I'm up here in Canada. There's not one of the bike shops near me. And they're like, okay, well, go make yourself a route. And so people have now put their own routes. And so they call them grass routes or grassroots. And so it's kind of turned into this truly the incredibly socially distanced. A bunch of people are going to be effectively riding their bikes this weekend. They have today, tomorrow, and Sunday to get their ride done. They record it, they upload it, and then they get entered in to win some things and stuff like that. And there's actually a guy from Tulsa who came down last night. So it's supposed to rain here this weekend, which would normally be completely normal for the Mid-South. It's also, you could call it the Mud South.
Right.
And
about half the time it's just sloppy, right?
Yes. That it didn't it was not originally intended that way. That was one of those things that first year it turned into mud, and some people just absolutely were like, yeah, I'm not coming back. Why would I ride my bike to just break my bike or carry my bike? And then people were like, oh, and then the next year it wasn't muddy, and people were disappointed. And so luckily this time of the year, it's a good chance that there's going to be some mud out there. But so we've got these storms coming in, and this guy came in at midnight this morning, and rode the 50-mile course before the rain and all that stuff would hit today, so he could qualify and get it done. So I think he might be the first finisher, at least here locally, of some of the routes. So it's pretty cool.
And it's not a time. I mean, you can time yourself. It's not a race in the race aspect.
Yeah,
no one's going to be placing.
I think they're just trying to. Which is, I mean, there's part of that race that there's very much like. I mean, we got like former professionals, Tour de France level riders coming to Stillwater, Oklahoma to ride our roads. But the majority of the race are people that are just there to complete it. That the challenge is completing it, not beating, another rider. And so this year there's that challenge again. I know I signed up to do the 50 mile. I have not ridden my bike in 3 months. So and with the weather this weekend, I think we're just gonna push that one off a little bit further, wait till it's a little bit nicer, and build back up to riding. So it's one of those things that it's a community of people that are still gonna try enjoy riding bikes together, but not together.
Not too close together.
Yeah. Yeah. But I bet you here in Stillwater, of course, you'll probably be hearing this after the event, but I bet you there's still probably going to be a few people that come in from out of town to ride the roads. They're going up to Pawnee this year's the halfway point for the 100-mile. And for the 50-mile, the halfway point is in Glencoe. So this is the first time that the route has gone northeast. It's always kind of been southwest. So it'll be fun.
I saw a picture of VFW Road, which is part of the route, and it looks pretty hairy.
Yes. That road for a long time has been like, oh, we got to get this on the route. I mean, it's Jeep level territory for four-wheel drive, to get up and down that, and you're gonna do it on a bicycle.
But like you said, that's part of the challenge, right? It's that people are challenging themselves, their physical and mental dexterity. They want to, even if they have to pick up their bikes and carry it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, do you guys remember a few years ago that, what was it, the bike blog? I can't remember the name of the bike blog or vlog, but they did that kind of spoof video. They said they were training for the race, which, was under a different name at the time. Mm-hmm. And it was just a guy running through mud puddles and carrying his bike. That was the whole thing, and it was kind of the joke, but it really underscored that the challenge, the gnarliness of it, the difficulty of it was part of the appeal. It's if you could do it, you're really
a great event for photographers.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. And a lot of them come. I think there might even be one out on the course this weekend trying to just catch anybody out there riding. But yeah, it's a fantastic event that he brings in the past has brought in thousands. And it was something that they wanted to grow. We've talked about bikes, but there's also a running event. There's a 50K too. And that's still happening too. And that's another one where normally that 50K course, you would have some aid stations and stuff out there. No aid stations. So if you're going to do it, you either have some friends out there, hanging out, waiting for you to come by to reload on water and food. Or I guess you could be catching some rain.
What about the double? I mean, there's like that endurance thing for the there's the ultra endurance event where you're basically running an ultra marathon and then you ride your bike 100 miles the next day.
Yeah. I don't know if I don't think there's an officially a double event, but I'm sure there will be somebody, at least here locally, that will go and attempt to run the 50K and ride the 100-mile. I haven't heard, but I bet you there'll be somebody that tries that.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Well, like we said, March and April, it had always been a big time of year here for sports and events and things like that, and they're not always going to go the same. I can say it's a really good time to be a sports fan. I think your two big months are March and October, and it's a really good time to be a sports fan for OSU or Stillwater. Stillwater Just came off a wrestling state championship, 6 individual titles. I think they're only 12 weights. I think so. That's like half the kids who wrestle ended up winning a title for Stillwater. And
Wow.
then we got OSU has 9 wrestlers going to the NCAA championships, and of course basketball. Baseball, you got a top 15 team for OSU. You got a top 10 team in softball. That I want to talk about basketball because, real quick, we got 2 teams that are likely going to be in the NCAA tournament. Tanner came up in the sports world. I'll put it to him. What is going on with OSU men's basketball, right? How are they going to play this whole NCAA sanction thing?
Right. I mean, I know that they've basically got banned from the tournament last year, but I think what they can essentially try to do is appeal it, which will allow them to play it, which then maybe the NCAA comes back after that and said, nope, you weren't eligible because of these infractions, but maybe it doesn't matter at that point because the games will have already been played. But, that was one thing about this year's OSU basketball, just environment was just not having the rowdiness at Gallagher-Ipa was probably just, this was the perfect year for that, where you have the number 1 recruit coming in who has been talked about like he might be the number 1 overall pick in the draft, which would be a huge thing for OSU sports. I don't think that's happened for decades that an OSU athlete has accomplished that, but, the teams have been playing real well. I mean, I want to talk a little bit about John Littell and the women's program first. He took over 10 years ago following the plane crash of Kurt Bucky, Marana Cerna. And, he's been there since, but he was just named the Big 12 Coach of the Year. The Cowgirls have had an amazing conference year. So this is
after their leading scorer transferring out.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's been an exciting year for the OSU basketball programs, both the men's and women's. Even the Stillwater High girls basketball team went to and played in the postseason for the first time in a long time. So, it's been a fun year on the hardwood here in Stillwater for sure. And it'll be exciting to see how OSU can keep playing going into the tournaments. 2 good teams going in. So
we talked a little bit. Our main upcoming thing, I think, is sort of a pandemic retrospective. I mean, Michelle, what do you remember of that timeline? Because I remember we were a little bit on edge, but we knew at some point Stillwater was going to have their first case. And when that happened, we'd already prepared for these sort of trigger levels, right?
Right.
One case would trigger something within the city and within the county, and that happened a year ago Sunday. What happened when we heard that? I think it was Stillwater Medical who just put that out to say, hey, we have our first confirmed case, and then we got our declaration from the mayor. I mean,
Immediately.
How do you remember that shaking down?
Well, I mean, basically, we got our first case pretty early because we were the case in Stillwater. At that point, there were only 7 cases in the entire state.
Wow.
So before that, it had been like, oh yeah, Oklahoma City, Tulsa, whatever. They're big towns. They got a lot of people. And then all of a sudden, boom, Stillwater, Payne County.
Here it is.
Right? So that was kind of a wake-up call for us, I think. And that immediately triggered before that it had been like, be cautious. And that triggered a partial shutdown of city facilities. They kept City Hall open, but they shut down the Senior Activity Center. They shut down the Community Center. They canceled all events. They canceled all permits for events that would have been public. So if it would have happened the week before the Mid-South wouldn't have been able to happen.
Yeah, I was actually so the mayor volunteers to help set up the finish line and all that stuff. And I think also Representative Ranson was there. And so we're moving barricades and setting stuff up. And of course, none of us are wearing masks. None of that had kind of happened yet. And, but I mean, he did mention, he's like, this seems kind of weird that, all these kind of people are here and everybody, and in the Mid-South had went and said, okay, everybody, and a lot of people didn't come last year,
Right.
Didn't travel in. And yes, it definitely very much felt like as soon as that race was over, the next day it was like everything's changed.
And that's kind of what happened. I mean, the senior nutrition program is still giving to-go meals. So, I mean, but, after that, the dominoes just started falling, right? I mean, it just seemed like every new case came along, we had the mask mandate that didn't last very long because it was part of an emergency order. And there was a lot of consternation associated with that. And then we had, later on the shutdown of non-essential businesses. So, that through all like the nail salons, the spas, the hair salons, hairstylists. I really felt bad for people who depended on that providing that type of service for their living.
Yeah.
Because that was really tough. Bars and restaurants, we watched, the local restaurants pivot as quickly as they could to focusing on carry out or curbside delivery. More of our retailers started doing curbside pickup.
And our bars attempted to be grocery stores.
They did. We had at least one that, had just opened not too long before that, that had to become a grocery store suddenly because you couldn't find food. And I remember that, the owner figured out that he could get the supplies from his commercial vendor. And so he was buying toilet paper and he was buying big packages of staples and breaking, industrial or, the commercial size packages and breaking them up for household use.
I had almost forgotten about the great toilet paper shortage.
Remember that? Remember when no one could find toilet paper?
That seems like so, or ground beef.
Yes.
Yeah, so many things.
100 years from now, that's what this is all going to be called.
The great toilet paper shortage.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I remember at least 3 times I went to 4 to 5 different places specifically to find toilet paper and couldn't find it anywhere. CVS, Walgreens,
so
all
weird.
3 Walmarts. It was just the strangest thing, and
it just felt surreal, didn't it?
It did. And you go and there's nothing. Just the shelves are empty, and it was
right?
It was post-apocalyptic. With the lack of stuff on the shelves, it really was.
I felt that way too. I started feeling really anxious because, having grown up in a time of relative peace and prosperity, I'm used to, you go to a store and anything you want is basically there. You can go to a big box store and no matter what it is, no matter what you need, you're probably going to find it.
In 5 different brands.
Exactly. And so the idea of walking into a store and literally not being able to buy a roll of toilet paper or having basic things like chicken or ground beef or whatever completely out of stock to where you could not purchase it. It was just not available and people were waiting.
You're side-eyeing those paper towels, be like, could I?
Exactly. The city actually put out a statement saying, please don't use those flushable wipes because they're not actually flushable. They don't degrade and they clog up our system. I mean, it was just a weird time. But I remember looking at those shelves and feeling a little bit scared because it made me realize for the first time that all of this comfort and plenty that we've always known is more precarious than we realize. We're more vulnerable than we realize that we are.
Because we're more connected,
Yes.
If ships start going across the ocean, all kinds of things start stopping.
Sure, and we're part of a global economy now. But anyway, so yeah, it's just been, and now we're kind of going gradually back the other way, right? Now we're gradually reopening more and more. Some people are more anxious to reopen than others. Some people want to move a little bit faster than others for various reasons, but we're getting there. People are getting vaccinated and we're getting there. So it feels like we're starting to move. It's what before it was like it's the end of the beginning, maybe. It's not the beginning of anyway. And now it feels like we're maybe the beginning of the end.
Mm-hmm. An anxious time.
It is.
Especially when it's kind of coincides with pollen season. So you were constantly thinking, oh, is this it? Is this it? I got, I have, this tickle in my throat? Mm-hmm. Is this it?
Or having to reassure other people that every time you clear your throat or cough that it's not COVID. And I remember, I can't tell you how many times I've said, I have seasonal allergies. Anyway, yeah, that's where we are. But we'll be looking back at all that next week, right?
Yeah. I can't say I necessarily look forward to it, but it'll be kind of interesting to see it all laid out there in black and white. So hopefully folks will pick that up and give us their thoughts, what they were going through at the time. I think that's going to do it. So thank you, everyone, for joining us in the newsroom with Chris Peters, Michelle Charles, Tanner Holubar, and I've been Beau Simmons. Thank you.